My name is Wires. Not my real name, but for the story's sake, I'll be replacing all of the names of the parties involved. I'm a 20-year-old trans man, but when the story happened I was 18, and the people at my work treated me as a woman. I worked in a supermarket, in the department that can both make you a sandwich or cut your meat. That was my first job, and I was honestly trying way too hard to impress my managers, which I later learned wasn't worth it, but that's another story. I was on a station which consisted of refilling food in a buffet-style bar. Basically all the food just out in the middle of the store with enough plastic containers to clog the ocean for a decade. I had two coworkers. One was a middle-aged woman who had an adult son, and she was great to work with. I really loved that lady. However, she was day shift, so we only had a couple of hours working together before the other night shift worker came in. For this story, I'll call her Kate. Now, Kate was in her 40s. She was also shorter than me, which is surprising considering I'm 5'3". Now, back then, I really liked to assume the best of people. I've learned better now, but even then, I was immediately unsettled when I met her. Even in all of my naivety, something about her just felt off, wrong. Now, I really like to follow my gut instincts, and to this day, it's never proved me wrong. If I don't like someone with no reason, later on something about them will surface. Her eyes scared me. I grew up under rather traumatic circumstances, so I'm not unfamiliar with a 1,000-yard stare. This wasn't that. This was something completely different. Her eyes were wide, far too wide, and her pupils might as well have been pin pricks. They never dilated, never moved. Now that I think about it, I can't even remember ever seeing this woman blink. Now, Kate was very talkative, very talkative. She would talk to me all day to the detriment of me doing my job. Since I was barely an adult and mentally very much still a kid, I didn't want to be rude to her. I also didn't want to get on her bad side. The way that she talked unnerved me. She talked softly and quietly, but with a voice full of anger. She would be talking about a band she liked, and it would sound like she was telling me that someone kicked her dog. She was divorced, and she let everyone know about it. She hated her ex with a passion, and I will say, even though I'm not sure if her stories were true, he sounded like a bad person. Kate said that he was emotionally abusive, and that's why she was so paranoid. And oh boy, was she. As someone who grew up with and still suffers with PTSD and severe anxiety, I at first chalked up her strange behavior to trauma, and I tried my best to be understanding. The other workers, however, quickly got annoyed at her antics, as she was constantly complaining and inserting herself in conversations that had nothing to do with her. Deep down, I just knew something was wrong with her, but I really didn't want to think it was the trauma. I thought I could maybe comfort her or maybe help a bit by sharing some of my own trauma at her request, showing her she wasn't alone. However, even though she would ask me strangely personal questions about my home life, such as if I was dating anyone, questions about my past and family, and when I tried to answer, she would always interrupt with her own life stories. I don't mind, but I did wish if she wanted to vent, she could have just done it without asking me to share, then cutting me off. The longer I worked with her and the more she talked, I noticed that her stories were, well, skewed in her favor. Many times her stories were her being less than kind to someone, then getting angry when they called her out. She also cussed a lot, which to a freshly out of hyper-controlling religion me, was a bit much. Her behavior started to worry me. As well as talking, she would softly sing, mostly hymns. She started seeming, well, sociopathic. But even more than that, she started paying a little bit too much attention to cleaning our knives. The knives we used were small but very sharp, but only after she started slacking off on the job in favor of blabbing my ear off as I worked did I start to get upset with Kate. Then it happened. Remember those plastic containers I mentioned on the bar? Well, I had to go to the back room, basically in a warehouse in the back of the store, to get more. Now, the back was unsettling at best. It was filthy, falling apart, and the lights in our stockroom in particular were all out. The only light was the one above the door a little bit down the hall from the room, so the whole room was backlit. Creepy, right? Not only that, but that back room for the whole year I worked at the store just didn't feel right at all. A chill went down my spine every time I had to go back there. But anyway, I went to the back alone, and I pulled out our box off the shelf. It took me a second, as the shelves were tall and I was short, when I suddenly felt my heart drop. A soft, barely hearable voice was singing "Jesus Loves Me" from behind me. I whipped my head around to see over my shoulder, and backlit in the entry to the room, standing in the hall, was Kate. I laughed nervously as I picked up the box. "Oh, Kate, it's you. You surprised me." "Yeah, I was just getting more containers, but if you want to get them, I do have to go wipe the bar down." At this point, she had really surprised me and thoroughly creeped me out, but I tried not to judge. After all, some people are just creepy. I shared this with my coworkers, who seemed more alarmed than I was. I was treating it as just a funny story as she walked into the department. She was holding the box and one of our knives, which I assumed she used to open the box. Thinking back on it, the box was still sealed, and we had a box cutter, but months later, I'd started to get more upset with her, and I could tell that she had started to genuinely dislike me. I was expressing this to a day shift coworker named Kim, who was a transfer. As I talked, her face became concerned. I used to work with her at the other store. I don't know how she even got hired here. She's absolutely nuts. Like, she threatened to kill everyone in the store and had to be escorted out and banned. That's what she told me. I went into a full-on panic attack. I had encountered psychopaths in the past, and it was honestly terrifying that I'd been so close to one for so long. I had given her every chance when I should have just followed my gut. She ended up quitting a week after that, all because our manager was just asking her to do her job, as she had started to slack off, barely doing anything around the store. I was relieved, as my coworkers promised to protect me from her should she come into the store. But weeks after she was gone, even now, I still find myself wondering. That day in the back room, what was she planning on doing in the dark, all alone with me with a knife? It really gives me the chills thinking about that.
For a little background, this happened last year at work. I'm a woman and work in an office building in a pretty typical job. One day, I was bored at work and didn't have a whole lot to do. I got a random phone call kind of out of nowhere. Being bored, I decided to answer it. I did not know who was calling me, as the number was not one that I had saved. Everybody who I typically talked to was a contact in my phone. This included friends, family, work people, and really everybody. So this was a little bit strange. When I answered the phone, some random guy said hi to me. I said hi. There was a bit of silence, and then I asked who he was. The man said that he must have the wrong number. I told him no problem. However, he did not hang up the phone. Instead, he started asking me questions. He first asked who I was, and I told him my first name. I thought that that would lead to him telling me who he was trying to call, but then he asked me where I was, and I said I was at work. I didn't tell him where I worked or anything. He then asked if I lived in the city that I did live in, and I said yes, still curious. I was wondering why he was asking me these questions. I remember that he asked me a couple of other things, but I interrupted him and said that I was at work and I really couldn't talk. The guy was starting to seem weird, so he said okay, and then I hung up the phone. I went on with work, and he didn't call back or anything. Probably like the next day or so, I got a random friend request on Facebook from somebody who I did not know. It was a guy, and we had 0 mutual friends. I did not accept it, but I also didn't decline it. I wasn't entirely sure if maybe I knew him somehow, but overall I just kind of ignored it. The next night I got a phone call again from the same number. Now I was at home and not at work. I was curious though, so I decided to answer. When I did, it was the same guy. He told me that he sent me a friend request on Facebook. In the call, he was acting super friendly and nice and told me to accept it. I went on Facebook and did so, I'm not sure why. He started making chit-chat, but I cut it short and said that I had to be going. After ending the call, I went on the guy's Facebook page and looked at it. He seemed pretty weird. The more I looked at it, the more I did not like him. He would just post random weird stuff, and he seemed kinda creepy. Like he would take these selfies with wide eyes and stuff, and he would post like 10 times a day. A few days went by without any contact from him. I had pretty much forgot all about the guy until he messaged me on Facebook. I did not want to talk to him, so I didn't respond and I deleted him, but I forgot to block his number. The next morning, I woke up to a slew of threatening texts. He asked me why I deleted him and even threatened to come to my job, mentioning it by name. I texted back telling him to leave me alone, and then I blocked him. I thought that would do the trick. A few days went by with nothing. Everything seemed fine, and I forgot all about the guy. But then, one day, I was at work again like normal. The way my office is I have sort of a cubicle in a much larger room. It's not quite a full cubicle though, so I can see around the entire office really. I sit at a table with my computer, and there are people kind of all over in the large room. When I was working, I heard some people start talking over near the entrance from the hallway. I looked over, and I saw that guy. I couldn't believe it. He had come to my job. He didn't see me right away, as I was kind of in the back corner of the room, not out of sight, but not that obvious either. I instantly ducked down and hid underneath my desk. My coworker saw me and asked what was going on. Meanwhile, the guy was talking to, I think it was Donald, who's one of the guys that works closer to the door. He was asking who the guy was and what he was doing here. The guy was saying that he was there to see someone, but when questioned, he didn't say who. He tried to walk farther in, and Donald was standing right next to him trying to stop him. I motioned for my coworker to get down for some reason too, so then she hid underneath her desk. I whispered to her the gist of the situation. The guy basically started walking around the office, I guess looking for me, but Donald was eventually able to kind of get him out of the room. He then closed the door and locked it. The guy started knocking on the door and then apparently asked for me, but Donald had it at that point and yelled at him that he was calling the cops. This finally got the man to leave. I then came out and explained to my coworkers the situation. Everyone was pretty confused, and we all agreed that it was crazy. Thankfully, after that, the man did not return, or else we would have called the cops. I still can't believe that the guy actually showed up at my job. I'm not really sure how he found out where I worked and stuff, or how he even got my number. I really have no idea who he was. But I hope that I never see him or hear from him again. In the summer of 1988, my aunt was a college student in Utah. She and her boyfriend, who later became my uncle, went camping with another couple in a park about 40 minutes south of Salt Lake City. They picked a spot, set up their tents, and planned to stay the night. It started raining hard early in the evening. A lot of people packed up and left, but my aunt and her group decided to wait it out. After a while, the rain stopped, so they made a small campfire and tried to enjoy the night. They talked, ate, and passed the time. Later, after it got dark, the rain started again. This time, the other couple didn't want to deal with it. They packed up and left, saying they'd rather drive back than sleep in the storm. My aunt and her boyfriend chose to stay. They put out the fire, got into their tent, and tried to settle in for the night. The rain kept coming down, steadily and loudly onto the tent. At some point, my aunt heard something that didn't match the sound of the rain. She said it was footsteps. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then she heard it again. It sounded like someone walking nearby, not too far from their tent. She sat up and listened, and then said that she saw a quick flash of light through the tent, like a flashlight turning on and off. She said her first thought was that it might be a park ranger coming to tell them to leave because of flooding. So she called out, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped right away. That woke up my uncle. She told him what she had heard. They couldn't hear much over the rain, and that made it harder to tell what was going on. They talked quietly about what to do. They were far from other campers, and there wasn't anyone close by to help. They agreed that if they heard anything again, they would leave. So they stayed still and listened. Minutes went by, and nothing happened. After a while, they started to calm down and laid back down to try to sleep. Sometime later, both of them woke up at the same time. They heard the tent zipper slowly being unzipped. Someone was opening the tent from outside. She screamed, and my uncle reacted right away. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight that he kept next to him, and he swung it towards the door as hard as he could. The flashlight hit something solid, and they heard a person gasp, then the sound of someone running away into the rain. They got out of the tent and ran towards their truck, which was parked about half a mile away. It was still raining, and they didn't stop until they reached it. When they got there, they found one of the back tires had been slashed. They didn't have many options, so they got in and drove anyway. Somehow, by going slowly, they managed to make it out of the park and reached a gas station a few miles away. They used a payphone to call 911 and report what happened. The next day, they went back with the police to collect their things. The officers looked around the campsite and found footprints all around their tent. They said the prints appeared to belong to a man, but they never found out who it was.
At the time of this story, I was 18, and I worked in a retail store nearby. I used to work mainly till 8 p.m., which during the winter would mean walking home in the pitch black dark. On this day, I'd finished work as usual, and I started making my way back home. When I got inside, my phone had started ringing, and it showed no caller ID. Curiously, I had answered the phone, and I could hear a muffled sound, and I decided to put the phone on speaker, but all I could make out was really heavy breathing. I responded back with, "Hello, who is this?" And there was a male voice on the other side. They started eerily laughing, which then turned into a serious tone, then saying, "Why did you leave me?" I asked again, "Who is this, and how did you get my number?" The eerie laugh continued, and just as I was about to hang up, I heard the words that then made chills run down my spine. "You know that I can see you, right?" I then immediately hung up and ran to close all of the blinds. I looked out the window, but I couldn't see anyone. I was honestly scared being alone in a house that I was meant to feel safe in. The next few days I spent looking over my shoulder, constantly feeling paranoid. About 3 days later, the buzzer would start going off during midnight, and whenever I would answer it, I would hear breathing. I eventually stopped answering it, and I would just let it buzz. I eventually started losing sleep, constantly feeling paranoid and scared, and my phone would still ring, but I just completely stopped answering all the no-caller IDs. Well, about a month later, my tenancy was finally ending, and I decided to move out into a different area. I also changed my phone number as well as my job. For anyone asking why I didn't tell anyone about this, honestly, I was just very naive, and I refused to believe it was actually even happening. Plus, I was in a very bad place. Call it rock bottom if you'd like. So yeah, I had a lot of other things going on at the same time, which I'm not going to add to this story. Anyways, things are much better now, and I want to thank everyone for taking their time to listen to my story. Please stay safe out there, everyone, and please be careful.
I was hanging out in my living room just watching TV in my apartment one night. It was a relaxing evening until my phone rang. When I looked, I saw that it was a number I didn't recognize, so I didn't answer. A short time later, I got a notification that I had a new voicemail. I thought that it was odd how somebody that I didn't know had just called me and left a voicemail. I figured it was some kind of a scam, but I decided to play the message. So I went on my phone and listened to it. A person with a kind of weird voice said, "Marcus, congratulations, call me back." My name is not Marcus. I figured that this person had the wrong number. I had no idea why somebody would be congratulating me or calling me Marcus. I texted the number saying, "I am not Marcus, I think you have the wrong number." Literally right after this, they called me back. I did not like the fact that they had called me instead of texting me, but I decided to answer to try to clear the air. As soon as I said hello, the man with the weird voice said, "Hi Marcus." The way that the guy spoke was just strange. It was not just the way his voice sounded, but also his tone and overall everything. I stopped him and said, "I'm not Marcus, you have the wrong number." The person insisted that I was. He said, "Marcus, congratulations." I was so confused that I was speechless. I literally said nothing. The guy then said, "Congratulations, Marcus," and then he hung up. At that point, I thought that it had to be now a prank. Somebody was pulling a joke on me. Why this was a joke, I had no idea. Who's Marcus? I don't know. I also didn't know who would be doing this because I didn't recognize the voice at all. I also have all my friends' numbers saved. It just didn't sound like a voice changer though, or one of those AI voices. There just seemed to be too much emotion in it. It sounded human. A short time later, they called again, which I let go to voicemail. The person left a voicemail once more, and when I listened to it, I only got more confused. The person calling said, "I'm calling you to say that you are Marcus, and I don't know why you keep denying it. Call me back when you have a chance, and congratulations." This was so weird. I didn't know what was going on. I did not call the person back. I didn't respond by text either. I really didn't know what to do. A few days went by, and I had no more calls or texts from this person. Then I came home to my apartment one evening to find an envelope at my front door. I picked it up, went inside, and then opened it. There was a letter that said at the start of it, "Congratulations, Marcus." The letter went on to say a whole bunch of nothing. It was typed out with a basic font. There was a lot of big words that sounded really complicated, but in my mind it pretty much added up to a whole lot of nothing. In the end though, I noticed that it said I had to pay them $10,000. I had no idea why. I ripped up the letter and threw it away. Since then, I have not received any more letters or calls or anything. But the fact that this person went to my apartment and knows where I live really creeps me out. I'm hoping that it was just a prank put on by a friend, but I just don't know who would do that or why. It just seems so random. During a camping trip with friends years ago, we witnessed something we couldn't explain. We were sitting around the fire deep in the forest off a logging road in British Columbia. We were not drinking or smoking as it was a dry trip for a friend. I noticed my good friend went silent and perked up like he was listening. He told us to shut up and listen. The forest was dead quiet with zero noise. Before, there had been frogs, birds, and regular forest sounds. He said something like, "Guys, there could be a cougar or bear around because the forest is silent. We might want to move to our cars." Before anybody could react, in the far tree line maybe 100 feet away, we saw something that completely put us all in shock. It was a small red orb, glowing like fire, producing its own light going between the trees. We watched it flabbergasted. It was clearly passing behind and in front of trees. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then slowly faded. After about 10 seconds, the forest sounds resumed. We all just sat there in shock after that. We took a very quick look around, and there was no road or anything in the woods. It couldn't have been cars or any other vehicle. It freaked us out so much we left and found a campsite with people and stayed there. We still bring it up from time to time when we get together. It gave me nightmares for weeks. I have no clue what it could be, and it's a 50-50 shot if people believe it when we talk about it. A couple of additional points. We are all experienced campers and have done these trips for years. We've heard weird sounds, bright flashes in the sky, and encountered some sketchy people out in the bush before. Nothing unexplainable, but just wild stuff, so we knew how to react and think in these situations. The friend who noticed the lack of sound first is in the bush almost 6 months out of the year as he does forestry work, so he knows the woods more than anyone. He was terrified to go back to work for months after this experience. He never wanted to talk about it or mention it, as he said it made his hair stand up. So more about the light experience. When I say the forest was dead quiet, I mean completely quiet. I could hear the fire crackle lightly, but that was it. It was like the air had been sucked out of the forest itself. I could hear my heart beating. To go from so much sound to nothing instantly kicked in my fight or flight. It was primal. Something in the back of my head was like, this is a bad situation. Then, seeing that red light, it flickered and shined like a glass ball about the size of a beach ball filled with fire. It produced its own light, and a faint glow passed into the trees as it passed. It was traveling about walking speed between the trees. It was a heavy bushed area, so you'd hear someone walking through. Once my eyes locked onto it, I felt a fear I had never experienced. I'll say this, I almost died a couple of years back, and that wasn't as scary as this light. It was like my brain was trying to figure it out, but couldn't. Once it faded and the forest sounds resumed, everything in my body said to run. We barely said anything to each other as we all got up. We exchanged a few looks and words, and all confirmed what we saw. There were 6 of us. We decided to get a closer look, I guess out of the hopes there would be an explanation, but there wasn't. We couldn't explain it, and that made it worse. We left and found a paid campsite about 20 to 30 minutes away at around 1 a.m. In the morning, the owner of the campsite came by and greeted us, as people don't usually show up that late. We explained what happened sort of jokingly as it seemed so strange. Her face turned to stone and she was super serious after we explained. She explained that the forest we were in is an extremely old growth forest, which makes sense since my province has some of the oldest forests still standing in the world. She said it's not uncommon to hear stories like that. She asked a bunch of questions and we talked about it for a while. I have no idea what or why, but it happened, and it was for sure there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. I have no idea why, but it happened, and it was for sure there. We have on multiple occasions talked about it. Whenever we do talk about it, I have nightmares. Even just thinking about this and writing this gives me the creeps.
I only got to experience this horror story through a phone call with a friend of mine. She gave me permission to share it as she can't do all that, and she had told me over the phone that night. She was quite spooked, but what happened was that she made great efforts to forget about it. This happened in our hometown, which I will not disclose for privacy reasons. We have this little shopping center near where my house was. It isn't really big enough to be a mall, and it really only had maybe like 6 stores and an AMC theater around that area. My friend, whom I will address as V, called me around 8 p.m. because she had something coming up, so she couldn't come over after shopping at a clothing store in that little shopping center. Now, to give a layout to the outside of this building, the front of the building had a medium-sized parking lot. She parked in a spot closest to the building so she didn't have to walk far in the dark. Now, she had her driver's permit, and I didn't at the time, which is why I wasn't there with her at the store. I heard her open the shop's front door, and she had kind of stopped in between her sentences very suddenly. I asked her, concerned, "You okay? Why did you get silent on me?" She speaks softly into the phone. "There's a creepy van that's parked close to my car," I replied. "Okay, it might not be anything serious. Maybe you're just being paranoid." V was one person I knew that overturned things more than I even did. She then said, "No, there's something off about the van. The driver's side door and back doors are open, but there's no sign of anyone in the car. It's angled just enough for me to see inside. I'll see if I can look inside from here." I said okay and to just keep me on the phone and be careful. Suddenly, after hearing her make a few steps and an intense 5 minutes of silence, I heard her gasp. I exclaimed, "What? What is it?" She then says softly on the phone, "I think I see what looks like a woman's silhouette in the back slumped over, but she isn't moving." Now worried about her safety, I told her to get back into the store and inform a clerk and call 911 just to be safe. She does so, putting me on hold temporarily while she goes inside and calls 911. Now, this is where I wasn't on the phone with her. She explained to me this part of the story with me afterwards. After she got inside, both the clerk and her tried to get a hold of the cops. She looked out the clear glass doors in front of the building to only see one man suddenly in the car on the passenger side, which she didn't see before. Another man suddenly bolts from behind the car where she couldn't see and closes the back doors, then hops into the driver's seat and starts the car. Meanwhile, the cops were just minutes away, and she could hear the sirens in the distance. Well, the suspicious van zooms out of there fast, and the cops arrive, and suddenly both V and another person who were watching told the cops that they just drove off, then pointing them in the direction in which they headed. One cop car stayed behind to get more information, while the other sped off to try and catch the van, calling for backup. Luckily, after putting me on hold, V thought it was wise to take a picture of the license plate from afar just in case. She gave the officers with her the information, and they gave that information to the cops chasing after the van, as well as an exact description of the color and potential year and brand of the car. The officers left and V headed home right after, as she wasn't about to stay there a moment longer. She then called me and explained everything that happened. She said that the officer she spoke to was kind enough to update her about the incident when she called about it. From the sounds of it, they never caught the van that night, but they traced the license plate to a residence. There they made an arrest of the owner of the house. He didn't disclose too much else to V. Even now though, me and V wonder what the woman was doing in that car. Was there foul play? Did she live? We never really found out for sure. I also get weirded out about the why of the people leaving the car doors open. Clearly they were hiding, Maybe even trying to kidnap another person. Maybe by using the woman in the car to lure another person to come and check in on her. What if Via and I weren't on the phone call? Would things have gone down differently? I'm honestly just glad she's safe and that her and no one else were harmed. Now, if we know that either one of us are going to be out late at night, we always text each other our locations, or we call to keep tabs just in case. It's a really scary world out there, and stuff like this can sadly happen even in your hometown where you thought you would feel safe. Please be safe out there, everyone, and be aware of your surroundings. If something or someone seems really out of place or character, do not be scared to maybe bring attention to it.
This happened many years ago in the 1990s. I was in high school at the time and lived with my parents and older sister at home. I was constantly using my phone to talk to my friends on almost a daily basis. This was before social media, obviously, and was before texting was really that popular. Every time I would call my friends, I would dial the entire number. There was speed dial and stuff like that, but I just didn't really use it. I had all my friends' numbers memorized, and I could dial really fast. So on this particular night, I was at home by myself. My parents were gone somewhere, I don't remember where, and so was my sister. I was going to call my friend Jacqueline and ask if she wanted to come over and hang out because I was bored. We would hang out at each other's places all the time. I think it must have been a Friday night, because normally I wouldn't have called people to hang out that late. And also, I don't think my parents and sister would have been out late on a weeknight. Anyways, after I dialed Jacqueline's number, I remember that she picked up. As soon as she did, I just started talking. We were such good friends and called each other so much that we really didn't say, "Hello, who's there?" We had caller ID as well, so we would know when each other was calling. As soon as I heard her pick up, I just said, "Hey, I'm bored, my parents and sister are gone, so I'm just home by myself. What are you doing? Do you want to come over?" After I said this, there was just silence on the other end. I said, "Hello?" Then the phone call ended as the other line hung up. I was confused. Why would my best friend Jacqueline hang up on me? And why wouldn't she say anything? So I dialed her again to call her back. I was thinking that it had to be a mistake and we just randomly got disconnected or something. This time when I called her, she picked up again. Except this time she said, "What's up?" I asked her if she had just hung up on me. She said no. I told her how I had just called her, and she said that she did not get any calls from me until just now. I was confused for a moment, until I realized that I must have dialed the wrong number before. Perhaps I got one of the digits wrong, and someone else had picked up. This was kind of awkward, because I had actually talked to them. Why would they not say anything, though? Either way, it was not too big of a deal, but just slightly embarrassing. So I went on to ask Jacqueline if she wanted to come over, but she said she could not because she was about to watch a movie with her parents. So we talked for maybe a minute longer and then hung up. After that, I just decided to go to the living room and see what was on TV or something like that. So around 30 minutes later probably, as I was there on the couch in the living room, I heard a knock on the front door. This was really strange because it was nighttime. All the windows were covered, so I had no idea who would be there. I was instantly creeped out. After a pause of maybe 30 seconds, they knocked again. This time I went over to a front window and very carefully looked out of it. It was dark outside, but I could tell that a man was standing there. However, I could not see any details about him. He then tried to open the door, which thankfully was locked. I was now freaking out. Some random guy was trying to break in, it seemed. He then turned and walked away. I only saw his backside as he made his way to the street. I just remember that he was wearing a jacket, so I couldn't really tell what he looked like at all. The whole thing really freaked me out, but I was glad that he was now gone. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I wondered if he was the person that I accidentally called. I mean, I had mentioned that I was home alone, and I had also dialed a number in the same area code, so he would be local. But how he got my exact address, I'm not sure. It could also just be a crazy coincidence, but I don't think it was. After that, he never came back. But I often remember that and wonder if it was the same guy, and if so, how he knew where I lived exactly. I'm just glad that he never returned. In the mid to late 1970s, my parents were in a camping club with about 5 or 6 other couples, and they camped at various campgrounds together around the Midwest. One time, we went to this campground that had a little park near a large pond with a playground not far from the water. My sister and I were playing in a sandbox when I was around 10 years old, and she was a bit younger. Suddenly, out of nowhere, This boy, who was probably about 12 or 13, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans with patches on the knees, was standing in the sandbox a few feet from us. He had long black hair down to his shoulders and dark eyes. He didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, and my sister and I looked at him nervously, as he wasn't smiling and was staring down at us. He finally said something and asked if we were brother and sister, and I told him we were. He asked where our camper was, and stupidly, without thinking, I told him the section of the campground my parents' club was camping in, which was about 2 blocks away. He then asked the name of one of the couples camping in our parents' club and if we knew them. I told him yes, and the boy said that they were his aunt and uncle, and he was going to surprise them later. He went on to say that he was camping with his dad, and he gestured vaguely in a direction on the other side of the pond. The kid squatted down close to my sister, and she backed up in the sand closer to me. He said, "Do you guys want to come to my camp? My dad brought tons of snacks, and I can give you marshmallows to roast if you want." I told him my parents already had marshmallows. This conversation went on for a bit, as he listed all the snacks that he had and wanted us to come and try them. My younger sister finally said she needed to go to the bathroom, which I took as my cue to get away from this weird kid who was really starting to make me feel uncomfortable, even at that young age. I told him, "We're going back now. We'll see you later when you come to your aunt and uncle's camper." He didn't get up when we got up, but instead leaned closer to us. He said, "There are bathrooms right down that road," pointing again past the pond. He added, "It's by where our camper is. You can take her there and stop by and get some candy from my dad." I told him there was a bathroom right over by the main office, which was just across the street from the playground, and I said we would just use that one. Suddenly, the boy jumped up, kicked whatever my sister and I had been building in the sand, and jumped out of the sandbox. He yelled, "You're so dumb! Who turns down free candy?" My sister and I rushed over to the office building, and I was fearful that he would follow us there. But after a few seconds of staring at us, he turned around and began to run down the path towards the other side of the pond. I took my sister into the men's room, she did her thing, and we cautiously looked around for the boy, who was nowhere to be seen, before we hurried back to our campsite. Once there, I told my parents about what happened, and our parents' friends happened to be sitting on the picnic table having coffee with them. We told them it was their nephew who was going to surprise them. Of course, they said they didn't have a nephew, and were a bit weirded out that someone knew who they were. My sister and I stayed at the campsite for the remainder of our time there, and of course the creepy kid never did come to our campsite.
It was right towards the end of my stay within that store. I had recently come out as a transgender man, and I had started using my new name. I had also put a pin on my apron with my pronouns he/him. Now overall, everyone was really supportive and kind to me. Then came the transphobe customer. I was a cashier during this experience. I was wearing a mask due to a COVID outbreak in my store, and a beanie since it was winter. I was wearing a chest binder and men's clothing, so I looked pretty masculine for the most part. My voice was a dead giveaway though, as I hadn't yet started medically transitioning. As I was ringing him out, he had noticed my pin and scowled at me. I ignored it. I didn't want any trouble. Then he said, "Oh, so you're one of those mentally libtards that want to shove your gay shit in my face, huh?" I just kept scanning his car full of lumber and then said, "Sir, please don't speak to me like that." He then just laughed and said, "What's the matter? You scared?" I just shook my head. He brought over his buddy and then said, "Look at this. It's got tits and wants to pretend it's a man." And the two started laughing at me. I was humiliated. Now, I'm not exactly small-chested, and certain positions made it visible that I wasn't completely flat even with a binder. So I then said to them, "Why are you looking at my chest to begin with? Please go to a different register. I'm not going to serve you." The guy got really mad at me for that. He then got right up in my face and pointed his finger at me. He then said the most gut-wrenching things someone's ever said to me on the basis of being trans. "You know, your kind ought to be slaughtered like cattle, and I'll be damn happy to do my part in getting rid of you." I called my head cashier over, and she heard everything, and she then told him to leave the store immediately. Before he walked away from my register, he then said, "I'll be waiting for you to get off." He then left his card in my register, and then proceeded to wait at the door. It was when he turned to his side that I had saw that there was a gun on his hip. Now, I don't really have an issue with guns for the most part. It was the fact that he threatened me with it that bothered me. My head cashier alerted our manager on duty, who we'll call R. Now, R was a big guy with the most hardcore RBF I'd ever seen, which is resting bitch face for those who don't know. He's also really loud. R yelled at these men for threatening my life and making lewd comments about my body. He told them they needed to leave the property and never return. They didn't listen and just laughed at him. Police had showed up not long after and had to escort them away. As the police were literally dragging these guys to their truck, the guys kept screaming all kinds of slurs and horrible names. I went home early that day, as my shift had ended less than an hour after they arrived in my register. That was so surreal and so painful. I cannot believe someone had so much hate in their heart that they would actually threaten my life, all because I'm trans. I'm really happy and I'm okay now, and I'm really thriving in my life. To anyone out there who may experience the same sort of bullshit, you're not alone. Don't let someone hurt you like that, and please have a safe support system. Be careful, everyone.
Something really weird happened a while back. I was at home one night in my apartment. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I think that it was kind of late. I just remember hearing my phone vibrating a ways away from me, and I went over to look. When I did, I saw that I was getting a call, but it was from a random number that I didn't know. It was strange because normally the toll-free calls and telemarketers would be during the day. Out of curiosity, I decided to answer the phone. I'm not really sure why looking back, but I did. When I picked up, I said hello. There was at first just silence on the other end. I said hello again a few seconds later. Then, finally, someone spoke. A man on the other end finally said, "I guess I have the wrong number." I said, "Okay." Then he hung up. I figured that it was an innocent mistake of him just dialing wrong. I didn't think too much of it. The whole thing was a little bit weird, but nothing to be suspicious about. The very next night, it was a similar situation, and I was home by myself, as I live alone in my apartment. This time, I know that it was really late. In fact, I was just about to go to bed, but my phone started ringing again. I had remembered the call from the night before. When I looked, it was once more a number that I didn't have saved. It very well could have been the same number from the previous night, but I didn't definitively recognize it at the time. I answered again and said hello. Once more, there was at first silence, but then I heard a man say hello. I recognized the voice, and it was the same guy from yesterday. I said something like, "Oh, it's you again." I then asked him who he was trying to call. I was wondering who my number was getting confused with, but the guy didn't answer me. Instead, he just asked me what my name was. I gave him my first name, and then he said okay, and then just hung up. I was really confused. The whole thing was pretty strange. I mean, why would he call me again if it was the wrong number? Wouldn't he have learned from his mistake? Not too long after this, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and saw that I had about 10 missed calls on my cell phone. This was really weird. I looked, and they were all from that same number. Why did this guy keep calling me? I also saw that he left one voicemail. Out of curiosity, I decided to play it. When I did, the first thing that I heard was a man breathing. It sounded like he was moving around, maybe walking or something. His breathing into the phone continued for about 10 or 15 seconds, but he didn't say anything. Then I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. It was really loud, like he shattered a window or something like that. The voicemail then abruptly ended. When I heard this, I was super creeped out. Right then and there, I blocked the number. My apartment was fine. He didn't break the windows there because I was on the 5th floor. But nevertheless, I looked around and made sure that everything was fine, which it was. The building was fine too, so I'm not sure what glass he broke. Since then, I haven't heard from the guy. I have received no more strange calls. However, I still wonder who that guy was and what he was doing.
When I was a little girl, my family lived in a bad part of the neighborhood. Many would refer to this as the ghetto, and I would agree. There are many things that I could talk about, but I'm going to talk about an incident that happened to my mom. I was about 5 years old and my brother was around 3. My mom was feeding my baby sister when she had heard banging on the door. I later found out that he was kicking the door. It was getting close to dinner, so my mom wasn't expecting anyone. The only person she knew would be home soon would be our dad, so why would our own father knock on his door? She then went over to look out the window that was next to the door. There she saw a teenager standing at her door. My mom had seen this teen living in our area with his mother. The guy kept looking back at the driveway and talking to someone. My mom knew that this looked sketchy, and knowing that she had 3 small children, one of whom she was holding, she had waited to see what would happen. He banged once again on the door and then continued talking to someone. My mom was trying to keep us kids quiet so that the dude didn't know that we were home. When he tried to kick the door again, my mom took her fist and then banged on the door as loud as she could. It turns out there were 4 to 5 guys that were hiding in our front yard. She also realized that when she banged on the door, she had scared the guy and he took off running with his friends coming out of their hiding places. She soon called the cops and told them what happened, but I don't really remember if they ever got arrested or not. My dad later told me that he had saw those same boys trying it again and he chased them away. I'm now 21 years old, and I still thank God that he gave me a brave mother who would protect her children from harm. For anyone out there who's living in a scary area, please either get out of there or if you can't, use your Second Amendment to keep yourself and your loved ones safe.
I'm quite an outdoorsy person, and so is my family, and we go on family camping trips every summer. I'm an experienced hiker and outdoorsman, and I frequently visit trails and parks, sometimes by myself, just to get my mind off things. I'm a teacher, so I have winter, summer, and spring break off, where I can take multiple day trips and camp somewhere. This occurred during winter break. It had snowed heavily, and the weather was cold, but in a magical Christmas way. I was going through a tough time in my life, so just to have something nice to do, I went out to a wooded area with my trailer to camp. It was a pleasant surprise to see that the park was void of people clearly not wanting to be in the cold weather. Me, on the other hand, had loved the snow and cold. It's just peaceful for me. I booked my campground spot for 3 nights. On the second night, it was amazing. The snow was nice and soft, and the moon was bright. It was perfectly bright enough to see almost the entire forest with a gentle blue glow. I just had to go on a night walk. That's how nice of a scene it was. The trails around the area go pretty far, so I left just after sundown. Most of the walk was uneventful. At the 2/3 mark of the trail, I heard a sound coming from the trees, a barely noticeable huff like something had been startled. I was surprised and immediately thought that it was another hiker. I looked in the direction of the noise, and if I were to tell you that I was so scared I heard ringing in my ears, it would be an understatement. I only saw his silhouette. He was tall, freakishly tall, at least 8 feet tall, long arms going down to his knees, standing upright like a person. He had weirdly proportioned features, almost like what you see in Skinwalker stories, except I don't think that's what it was. He stood there like he was shocked that I was there, like he had never seen a person before. He wasn't aggressive, but more curious. I looked at him like I had never seen anything like him. We were almost parallel to each other in our reaction. He tilted his head slightly and leaned forward to get a better look. We were 20 feet away from each other, enough distance for me to at least get a head start if need be. I was still scared out of my mind, but I came to my senses enough to see that he wasn't aggressive, more curious than anything. I reached into my satchel and grabbed a piece of beef jerky and threw it at him. He took a step back and looked at it before slowly crouching down and grabbing it. He then started walking back into the dense forest. I wasted no time sprinting to the trailer, packing everything up, and booking it out of there. I didn't even care about checking out and canceling my last day. Since then, I've never been able to go back to the park without thinking about him, who he was, if he was real or a figment of my tired imagination. This happened many years ago. I was much younger and a single man living on my own. I was out with a friend one night watching the game at a bar. I remember that he had to leave early for whatever reason, so I stayed there by myself because I wanted to see the end of the game. I was sitting at the bar, and towards the end of it, I noticed a woman sitting a few seats down. The bar had not really been that busy. I didn't notice when exactly she got there, but I don't think she was there for the whole game. There were other people around. The bar wasn't dead, but it was not super busy either. The woman seemed to be there by herself, and she was just sitting at the bar drinking something. I found her to be attractive, so I was actually thinking of striking up a conversation with her, but she spoke to me first. She looked over and asked if I had bet money on the game. Admittedly, I had bet the over on the score, and I told her that. We got to talking a little bit, maybe like 20 minutes, and before I knew it, the game was over. I thought that it was a good conversation, and shortly after the game, the woman said that she was going to leave. I decided to ask her for her number, and when I did, without hesitation, she said that I could have it. She told me the number, and then I put it in my phone, and she left. I was feeling good about how things had gone. When I talked to her, I was funny, she was laughing, I asked her questions, and she had asked me questions. It seemed like a really good conversation in my opinion. I was excited to hopefully see her again and text with her. The next day, I did something out of character. I was feeling bold, so I decided to call her instead of just text. The way our conversation had gone, I figured that she would not mind. So I called her number sometime in the late morning. She picked up, and I heard nothing on the other end. So I spoke. I said, "Hello," and I was literally starting to say something else when the phone call just ended. It was like she had hung up. My heart sank. Then, moments later, I got a text. It said, "Who are you?" I replied with my name and said, "We met last night, remember?" In my mind, there was still a sliver of hope in this moment, and I was hanging on to it, even if that sounds pathetic. She texted back saying, "Huh?" Again, my heart sank. I thought to myself, how would she not remember me? I had spoken to her for a long time, and I knew she wasn't drunk. Sure, both of us had had drinks, but I only had 2 the whole night, and I can confirm that she did not even seem drunk at all. So I decided to try to clear things up by calling her again. I felt that I could explain the situation better over speaking and not texting, so I dialed her back. This time she picked up again, except it was not the girl that I had met at the bar. It was some random guy, and he sounded angry. Obviously, I couldn't see the guy, but he sounded large and had a sort of deep and booming voice. Right away, he was angry. I thought for a moment maybe he was the woman's husband or boyfriend. He asked who I was and why I kept bothering him, and asked if I was trying to prank him. He said all this without letting me speak. When he was finally done yelling at me, I told him that I had met a girl at a bar last night and she gave me this number. He started yelling at me again, saying that that was the most unbelievable thing he ever heard and that he will not be harassed and he ought to call the cops on me. Then he said, "Matter of fact, I should come down and find you and beat you myself." I didn't know why this guy was so angry. I asked him if he knew the woman, and he said no, once more going on and on an angry rant. This guy was one of the angriest people I've ever spoken to. So what? I called the wrong number. Is that like the crime of the century? I told him I was sorry and I had the wrong number, and I said I really didn't mean to bother him. He started ranting again, saying I had better leave him alone now. I hung up at that point, cutting him off from another one of his rants. I double-checked the number that I dialed with the number the girl gave me. It was the same. So either she intentionally gave me the wrong number or I wrote it down wrong. Part of me wanted to believe that I just wrote it down wrong, but deep down, I knew the truth. She had given me the wrong number, but it didn't end there. The guy who I called by accident then started texting me. He started spamming me with threatening messages. He was saying how I harassed him and how he was going to find me and hunt me down and get me. After like the 10th text in the span of 2 or 3 minutes, I blocked him. And after that, I didn't get any more of those texts. I went back to the bar a few times over the next several months. I didn't want to see the woman again, but if I did, I was planning to talk to her about giving me the wrong number. However, I never saw her again. I'm still kind of mad about it, but it happens, I guess. It was my friend's 17th birthday. He's really into camping and various other outdoor activities. I was invited along with a few other friends, but because it was a really busy time of the year before graduation, only 4 of us ended up going. It was my friend and myself, and then his 13-year-old brother, who had also brought a friend. We camped at a lake out of town, a little bit into the woods. The spot we camped in was a small clearing. It wasn't an actual official camping spot, but it worked well nevertheless. We ended up cutting our own firewood from nearby trees. We didn't want to, but my friend forgot firewood, and we didn't have any cell phone service where we were. If you've ever cut down trees with smaller camping saws and hatchets, you know it takes a while, even with the 4 of us. Over the course of 4 hours, We acquired quite a collection of firewood, so when the sun started to set, we got hungry and wanted a fire. The fire took an hour to start. Thanks to the rain that morning, the woods was very damp. Eventually, with the help of some hand sanitizer in my backpack and the wood drying out from our other attempted fires, we got a decent fire going. I remember being really relieved. We were really hungry and managed to cook up some hot dogs and bacon. We were quite tired from the day of cutting down small trees, so we retired to our large tent pitched in the clearing. We fell asleep very fast, but around 2 in the morning, I woke up from a really cold and loud wind. I remember struggling around in my sleeping bag trying to find a comfortable position or trying to stay warm. I ended up just lying in bed for what seemed like hours, unable to sleep, until suddenly I heard a loud snapping of a branch, which I just put off as a small animal. I mean, we were in the middle of the forest, so it made sense at the time. Anyways, around 3 minutes later, I heard it again, but just a little closer. I thought about waking my friend or his brother up, but being me, I didn't want to be rude and wake them up just in case it was just an animal. That's when I heard distinct footsteps that sounded maybe 10 or 15 feet away. At this point, a chill ran up my spine, and I instantly thought, what if it's a cougar or a bear? As living where we were in Canada, it wouldn't be uncommon. Nevertheless, I was a little scared. Now, it's worth noting that my friends and I all had decent-sized knives on us, along with various other sharp objects, like our hatchet and compound bow. At this point, I kept hearing these footsteps very slowly, so I armed myself with my knife and put my friend's hatchet through my belt loop. I slowly unzipped the tent, slipped my shoes on, and decided to check it out. That probably wasn't the best choice looking back on it now, but I was trying my best to be brave. Gripping my knife, I creeped outside into the cold night. For a minute, I searched around the tent, finding nothing. So I decided to take a pee as long as I was up, and then after I was done, I started back towards the tent, and then heard another branch snap. Trying not to be loud, I called out, "Who's there?" No response. So I started to walk towards the sound, when I saw the dark silhouette of a large, what looked like middle-aged man. I panicked and called out, "Who are you?" while raising my knife. The man rotated his body towards me, before he turned around and sprinted off down the trail towards the parking lot. I stood there shocked for a minute. I didn't sleep much that night, waking up constantly. In the morning, I told my friend, his brother, and his brother's friend. They were very shocked by this, but my friend's brother told me around 1 in the morning he also heard footsteps and branches. Who knows what that man's intentions were for 4 teenagers camping in the woods? Maybe he was on drugs, or another camper nearby, which I really doubt. What creeps me out the most about this incident is that in that area where he was standing, which I checked in the morning, was where I found my friend's brother's sweater on the ground. He claimed he didn't put it there, and I don't think the wind moved it there.